Hi. Hi, everybody. My painting is crooked. Ay. Hello, everybody. How is my audio? We are just setting up and we're on standby for our interesting, I'm pretty sure, an interesting conversation and discussion with Dr. Edsel Maurice Salvana. He messaged me and we're going to go live at supposed to be at 2:30, but it's still early. And I know that he is in the car. And apparently it's raining. Umuulan ba sa inyo? Umuulan ba dyan? Okay. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and I think in Twitter, but I have not seen my Twitter. And while it has been an interesting few hours, I have to say. Thank you so much for being here and for your very kind words and messages that I have been reading. Maraming salamat and welcome to my new followers. Biglang maraming new followers. Oh my gosh. I think mga 50,000. And for that, I have to thank so many people. Lahat kayo, thank you for sharing the video of Avel Bacudyo that I posted last night. And shout out to Direct Daryl Yap of Vincentiments. Siya yung una nag-share eh. Salamat, Direct Daryl. And I hope to meet you one day. Shout out then kay Sass for the Motherland for also reposting my posts. And to many. And Crisette, hello Crisette. Thank you also. Ang dami-daming mga magagandang message. Pero let's change our mood first right now. Let us focus on our guest, si Dr. Salvana. Ayan na siya. Si Doc. Hi, Doc. Do you hear me? Yeah, I'll call you in a second, okay? Let me introduce you. Now, our doctor is very busy, so I'm going to get right to it, and let me introduce him to you. Okay, so we have invited Dr. Edsel Maurice Salvana. He is the director of the Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology at the UP National Institute of Health, and he is the infectious disease consultant at the UP College of Medicine and the Philippine General Hospital, adjunct faculty for global health at the University of Pittsburgh. He is also a TED Talk fellow, having given an actual TED Talk titled The Dangerous Evolution of HIV back in 2017. He is a member of the DOH Technical Advisory Group and played a very active role in the IATF, or the COVID-19 Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases. Now, his role in the IATF gave him social media fame during our lockdowns, both good and maybe not so good. But this is something I'd like to talk to him about today, among many other things. So, folks, let us welcome Dr. Edsel Salvana. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Daphne. Good afternoon to everyone who's watching.
Hi, thank you, Doc, for making time. I know it's a very busy schedule for you now, but we're so happy that you are here. And I know that you're fresh from Vancouver. You just came back from the TED Talk Summit. Is that right?
That's right. There's a TED conference every year, except for the pandemic years, 2020 and 2021. And that's something that's kind of a big event. We have, probably the best speakers in the world attending at that point. This year, we had Bill Gates, we had Elon Musk, and we had Al Gore, among many others
That's
who were speaking.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So, do you get to attend all of them, or is there limited seats, or what?
Well, if you get in as a TED Fellow, you attend one, and then if you're a TED Fellow, you can apply for a senior fellowship, which lets you attend two more and another two side events. Actually, otherwise, you can apply to attend if you're not speaking and if you're not a fellow. It's by an invitation only, and the entrance is $10,000. So
What? Oh.
mag-a-apply ka na, magbabayad ka pa. So that's why nag-fellow na lang ako kasi hindi ko kaya yon.
Wow. Teka lang. So which you didn't actually attend any of the talks then, or you did the minor ones?
I did. No, um I attended the whole. So it's a summit, or it's a conference, and there's about 8 sessions of about 3 or 4 talks each. So the whole conference is what people pay $10,000 to attend. As a fellow, we get to attend it for free.
Oh wow. So did you hear Elon Musk? Because he's the one in the news.
Oh yeah, he in fact he was being interviewed at that time, and that's what was being broadcast live, and the media was following that, and they were like there on stage in front of us while they were talking about that. Chris Anderson, who runs TED, was the one who was interviewing Elon Musk.
Wow. Fascinating. What an interesting time to be out there. It is the first TED Talk conference. I can't say post pandemic because technically we're still in the pandemic, right? But it's the first face to face one that you guys have had. And so many disruptions and things happening in the world. So we have Elon Musk and his take is buying Twitter right now, and then you have Bill Gates there and his role in public health, and who was the other one? Al Gore, and I guess climate change.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
environment, space junk, all sorts of stuff. And there were a lot of others. There were scientists. There were astronomers who were launching rockets to Mars. All those very interesting people there. And the attendees are actually also very interesting people. Who are affecting the world in different ways. There are a lot of CEOs there. There's a lot of movers and shakers. There were actually two Filipinos. One was Ryan Gersava, who is actually a TED Fellow this year, 2022, and he got to give his talk, and it was a very good talk about his NGO, which actually deals with people who have non-apparent disabilities.
Mm.
Because when we talk about people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs, people who are blind, but these are non-apparent disabilities. Like, for instance, somebody who has HIV or hepatitis, who can be discriminated against because if
Mhm.
you go to work, if you have Hep B, especially if you're in the medical field, there are certain things that are barred to you, especially if you're trying to go abroad. So that's really his
Right.
NGO. So it was very, very interesting talk. And there was another Filipino who is part of a project that won the Audacious grant. I think they give him like $1 million to do their thing.
Wow.
And she gave a talk about the lumads of Camiguin,
Mm.
and how they're making sure that it's not just the lumads, but actually all over the world. Their NGO actually advocates for getting ancestral lands back for all these, and they've done so much good work around there. So very, very interesting conference.
That is so fascinating. Okay, again, we are live on Facebook, on Twitter, and in YouTube, and we have Dr. Edsel, Maurice, Savanya here. Thank you to everyone who's watching, and feel free to post your questions, and we'll get to it in a little while. But let's go back to how you started in TED Talks. You gave a speech in 2017, and this was about HIV in the Philippines, because before everything now is about COVID, and we're so aware of so many things about COVID. But I remember reading the news and also posting some public service announcements about the alarming rise of HIV in the Philippines and how it was potentially an epidemic back then. And that's what your speech was about. Where are we at now with HIV in the Philippines?
Well, at the time I did my talk, we were doing some work in HIV, because at that time the Philippines was one of the fastest growing HIV epidemics in the world. Unknown to most people, HIV is a pandemic, and it's still going on more than
Huh?
35 years already. And that's why it doesn't, people think of pandemics as flu, COVID, Ebola, those kinds of things. But actually, HIV remains a pandemic. It is better controlled in some countries because of antiretroviral treatment. But in the Philippines, it's one of the fastest growing HIV epidemics in the world. We started low. We got our first two cases in 1984. But sometime around 2006, 2008, something changed, and our cases started to grow very fast, almost exponentially.
Mm.
And the question for me was, why was that happening? We were so low all this time, and there's something that probably changed. And so
Mhm.
one of the things we looked at was the genomic data on HIV, and that was my research. And we did prove that the subtype of HIV in the Philippines has actually changed from subtype B, which is more common in developed countries, to something called CRFAE, which is a circulating recombinant form, which is a combination of subtype A and an ancestral subtype E, which no one has ever seen, but because there's an AE, they think that it's there. So the bottom line of our research was that even before COVID, na we're talking about variants ngayon, di ba? And even recombinants like XD, XE, XF, we were seeing this in HIV. And that's why
Mm.
it was easy for me to understand what was going on, because we saw this in HIV, and we categorically showed that yung subtype ng Philippines between 2006 2008 went from predominantly B to predominantly AE. And now data that we are about to publish shows that AE is more transmissible, it has higher viral loads, and also progresses faster to AIDS, because their presenting CD4 counts, which is a measure of their immune system, is actually lower, even if you compare them to people with subtype B. So my research basically, and my TED talk, yung dangerous evolution of
Yeah.
HIV, also kind of presaged itong nakikita natin with the variants, because this does happen with viruses, and we have very, very good evidence that the HIV increase in the Philippines was driven by a change in the genetics of HIV.
Oh my goodness. So while your work was focused on COVID the past 2 years, what has happened to HIV studies and reporting in the
Right.
Philippines?
Yeah, so that really kind of went by the wayside, where you were seeing higher rates of drug resistance as well, because
Mm.
HIV does become drug resistant to the treatment. And the problem with the drug resistance in HIV is it can also be transmitted to other people. And in fact, our data was showing that it was already above 10%, which is really the threshold where people should think about drug resistance in HIV. During the pandemic, we actually saw that the number of cases for the first time in, I don't know, 10 years actually started to go down. And we attributed that, it looked nice, but we were kind of also a bit leery about it, because obviously fewer people getting tested during the pandemic, fewer opportunities to transmit HIV also. But now,
Mhm.
starting 2021, looks like we're right back to where we started before the pandemic. And so it's really bumped up again. We're seeing about 38, 40 cases per day of HIV, which is
Oh
really
my.
a far cry from 2 cases in 1984.
Yeah.
And we've really seen those increases in the last 10 or so years. And that's why we've really been working to try to get the number of people who get HIV. If they are living with HIV, then we make sure they're on treatment, because once you're on treatment and it's effective treatment, they don't have drug resistance. They don't transmit anymore. So
Okay.
that's the way that we're going to handle HIV in the Philippines.
Interesting. Because now we're all semi experts in vaccines. Is HIV a vaccine preventable disease?
Not yet. In fact,
Ah,
there have been a lot of efforts to produce an HIV vaccine. The best minds in the world, including Dr. Tony Fauci,
yeah.
worked on HIV vaccines, and the best they were able to come up with was something that had a vaccine efficacy of about 38%, and
Mm.
then after 1 year, it was gone. It's because HIV mutate so fast, much faster than even SARS-CoV-2. And so that you actually see variants not just between patients, but within a person. In a person, HIV is constantly mutating. And in fact, if we take the blood of someone who is infected with HIV now and take it about 10 years later, assuming they're not on treatment, the virus is about 5 to 10% different from the starting virus. So
Interesting.
nagmi-mutate siya in the person. And so we actually have a population of viruses in people who have HIV. And that's why it's so hard to make a vaccine, because it's changing as
Mhm.
you go along.
My goodness. Okay, so when the pandemic happened, and can you walk us through how you ended up becoming part of the IATF or the DOH Technical Task Force? Or what do you call it? Yeah, for I guess because it is an infectious disease, and they called you in. What was that like for you in the early days?
Right. So, being part of the National Institutes of Health, we are government. It's a state
Mm,
university. Of course, there's not much politics involved because we're doing science, we're doing education. But I have sat on a lot of my colleagues and myself who are at UP and at NIH. We regularly get called by DOH for technical advice because we're the ones working on this. So I'm not a stranger to working with DOH with the government when it comes to scientific advice. Around January, we heard about those three cases of COVID that were brought in by Chinese tourists, basically. And at that point, the government felt that it was important to prepare because we thought it was just a matter of time until we would start to see community transmission. Wasn't a sure thing yet at that time, but there was really a very big risk. So around February, Department of Health formed something called the Technical Advisory Group. And the technical advisory group was composed of about seven people who were initially invited, but only about four of us actually said yes. And three of these are infectious disease doctors, myself, Dr. Marisa Alejandria, and
mm,
Dr. Ana Ong Lim. The fourth one who said yes was actually Dr. Vicente Belizario, who is the dean at the College of Public Health. But he sent one of his deputies because he had a lot of other things that he was doing. And so February, we were meeting maybe every 1 or 2 weeks, and we were just really watching to see what would happen with COVID in the Philippines. And so we had those first three cases, and the whole February we had no new cases. Although we were testing people who had traveled from China, so we were locking down. And then towards the end of February, since we had no cases for 28 days straight, sabi ng WHO, oh, it looks like the Philippines has contained those three
mm.
those three cases na Chinese. Of course, famous last words, di ba? Every
Oh,
time you say something like that, about 2 or 3 days later, we had two new cases. And these two cases, yung isa had a travel history from Japan. So, that makes sense. The second one was the one from San Juan, who had no history of travel and who had no history of exposure to anyone. And that was the one that was really giving us nightmares. Now, if we can't find where this guy got COVID, then it's probably spreading all over the place already.
that's
And
what
at
they
that
call community transmission.
Correct. Yeah, that's the earliest indication of community
Mhm,
transmission because we don't know where it came from. And so if there's one of these guys, there's probably more of them. And that's
mhm.
when we started talking about locking down. Kasi nakita
Yeah.
naman natin what happened in China, di ba? The only thing that WHO saw that worked in controlling the spread of COVID was locking down. And at that
Mhm.
same time, we were seeing what was happening in Italy. Now we only, Italy. There were people dying at home because
Yeah,
there were no more hospital beds. And
right.
so kami sa technical advisory group, we look at each other and kasama namin yung WHO doon, saying, the Philippines has maybe 10% of the resources in terms of hospital capacity and healthcare
Oo
capacity
nga.
of these countries. If we don't lock down, it's going to be a massacre because all these people are going to die at home. So that was the time na we only had 52 cases. It was March 12. We said, I think it's time to really lock
Right.
down kasi we had no vaccines, we had no effective treatment. In retrospect, those cases that we saw in March were completely different from the ones that we saw in January. May lineages yan eh, di ba? We talk about B.1,
Mhm,
B.1.261, mga ganon. Yung unang cases na nakita natin sa China, na galing China, two of them were subtype, not subtype, lineage A, and one was lineage B, or I think it's the other way around. Anyway, basta lineage A, lineage B yon. So in
mhm,
other words, these are the Chinese lineages. Wala pang number. Ngayon kasi di ba may mga number na B.1.26, mga ganon.
mhm,
So lineage A, lineage B, yung tatlong yon. And then the first ones in March, around March 5, I think, were B.6. B.6 is not a Chinese lineage. It's a Southeast
Mhm.
Asian lineage. So, ang closest na pinanggalingan nun is either a country in Southeast Asia or India. In fact, when we did the genomics, mas nagka-cluster siya with viruses that were seen in India, in Singapore, and other places of Southeast Asia. So we can say that yung January, with what we were doing, as in sobrang praning talaga yung mga ERs at that time. Kung galing kang China, nakakulong ka agad. So
Right.
that intervention actually worked. We were able to delay community transmission by at least a month. And that
Mhm.
helped. And then,
Right.
yung sa March, yun na yun. And then, malaking, mahabang kwento yon. I can
Oo.
tell you
So
about
then
it later if you want. But yung locking down process was involved the TED Talk.
yes, that's next chapter. Ang nangyari from my point of view, because I was reading up on things from the WHO and from you guys. Uh, ang parang nangyari kayo yung kontrabida. Medyo misunderstood, ang daming conspiracy theory, and it was you took it upon yourself though to write in your Facebook and uh, talk about what was going on in your own way, um, in a manner that you became our eyes and our ears in front of the pandemic. You were the ones you gave a face to the frontliners, but at the same time you also took some blows. Like public health was highly politicized, and I would say not just here but globally. We saw it to happening to Dr. Fauci. We saw it in the EU. We had Canada everywhere, uh, and it happened to you. What was that like for you?
Well, it was not pleasant, but it wasn't new to me though, because I was also involved in the Dengvaksha controversy. Yeah, I mean, I have articles there, and I was attacked. My family was threatened during that time because even though they were trying to crucify everyone who was involved in bringing out Dengvaksha, and my position has always been, if there was any wrongdoing, of course we should throw the book at them. But this is actually a good vaccine. We have data that this is a good vaccine. You can go after people who were involved in maybe prematurely using it, but the data for the vaccine, if used properly, especially in people who have already had not COVID, who have already had dengue, actually decreases your risk of severe dengue. And it is a vaccine that is being used everywhere else in the
Right,
world where there is dengue. And right now, we're only the only country with endemic dengue that probably that does not have that indication. The U.S. recommends that you get a
hmm
dengue vaccine if you're traveling or if you live in an endemic country. So that was also highly politicized. And
hmm
those of us who were trying to stand up for the vaccine were actually attacked as villains as
hmm
well. Because bakit daw namin kinakampihan yung mga taong gumamit dun sa vaccine
right.
na hindi karapat dapat. And my stand has always been, if those guys did something wrong, please go ahead
Right.
and throw the book at them, but do not destroy this vaccine.
Oh, yeah. But were you trained for this? Because it's like a PR nightmare. It's communications nightmare. But you're a doctor. You're a scientist. Not all scientists are good communicators, but you seem to have the gift. You write so well. Uh, People like you. You speak well. I mean, you've given a TED talk, and but there's so many forces at play when you introduce vaccines and new policies and crazy things. So, where did you get this steady resolve to deal with the public?
Yeah, school of hard knocks. Trial and error. You just have to really understand that if you want to go out there and put yourself out there are people who are going to attack you and people who will not like you. We always said, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, if no one's mad at you, you must not be doing a very good job.
But why did you
Because
put yourself out there
Oh, well, first of all, when I came home, I
from
actually wanted to
the
work
US?
more from the US, because I trained from 2002 to 2008 in the United States. I left 2001. And when I came home, my first love was actually tropical medicine. So I like worms and parasites and those kinds of things. And that was even my research when I was in the US. But when I came home, we had that HIV epidemic coming up, and I felt that I had to advocate for HIV. You cannot work in the HIV field and not become an advocate, because there is
Mm-hmm.
so much prejudice, there's so much bias, there is so much misunderstanding, that you have to advocate for your patients, because most people saw it as something that happened to people who had done something wrong, or people who, it's there's a lot of prejudice that is not science based at all. And so at that point I said, I need to do something. I need to be able to communicate as well. I mean, looking at people, even Dr. Fauci, had his really hard knocks. He was called a murderer and
Yeah.
genocide by other people, even people in the HIV community who did not understand what he was trying to do. And he himself admitted that he misunderstood what was going on. Very early on, I had an HIV advocate actually shoot me down because, ako rin, at that point, I thought I was doing what was right. So I was saying, HIV has no cure at this point. We have some treatment, but maybe if you have HIV, probably shouldn't have sex muna with anyone. And then the advocate told me, "How dare you? That is a basic human right." And
Mm-hmm.
we have ways to prevent, and people are consenting adults. And now we know that people on treatment actually don't transmit. So the idea that I was saying na from on high, saying na don't do that, when I'm actually ignoring basic human rights. And that to me was an eye opener, na I really need to understand this much better, the nuances, if I'm going to be an effective
Mm-hmm.
advocate. And so I think being someone who communicates, a doctor who sees patients, who listens to all their stories, but is sworn to secrecy, na I can't. But to advocate for that, I have to understand what
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, and of course, um, working with media people such as yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that it's very easy to be misquoted, because
Mm-hmm.
scientists don't talk in certainties. We talk in probabilities. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you talk about probabilities, if the media person has already a headline in his head, it's very easy to swing it that way, di ba? And the problem really there is magbabago talaga yung message mo, and in some cases it can do more harm than good. And so
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to speak to media in short sentences para klaro, not ambiguous as much as possible. Even my writing now, short sentences. If you look at scientific papers, we have like kilometric long sentences. That is not how to communicate. Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
not. And I think that it's almost required training for doctors, for scientists, to understand how to communicate to media, how to write for the public, if we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about getting the message across. It's not something that you can learn on the fly, which I did, but to disastrous results. What you're seeing now is actually very, very well curated, and I still screw up from time to time. It's something that you have to embrace, especially if you're putting yourself out there in social media.
Well, I watched you being praised, and people were grateful to you, but at the same time, you were also being attacked. But I was wondering, why does he keep doing this? I mean, I know that you were busy saving lives, but there were times that you were, in your PPE and you were writing, and was that part of your therapy also? Did you find it therapeutic to let it out?
Well, I think it's important to have those kinds of outlets. But I mean, I
Mhm.
have my wife, I have my friends, I can let it out that way. But I think that there was really a lot of misinformation. Some
Mhm.
of it deliberate, so it's disinformation. And there's some that, it's just there are too many moving parts, and things change rapidly. For instance, very early on, sabi ng WHO, don't wear masks unless you have
Yeah.
symptoms, di ba? And then
Hmm.
nagbago yun. And so it's very hard to maintain trust when what you're saying changes. But that is the nature of science. The
Science.
more evidence you get over time, you have to change your recommendations. If you stick to something that's already disproven, edi fake news yun.
Hmm.
For instance, I'm gonna say something that's probably gonna mess people up. Ivermectin. We already
Hmm.
know. we already knew at that time na walang masyadong ebidensya. And now, lalong-lalo na, there are already randomized control trials that show that it doesn't work. And yet people still continue to use it. So in that sense, hindi science yun.
Mm-mm.
That's more akin to fanaticism na. So we have
Mm-mm.
to change. We have to remove those things that are not supported by the science because it's harmful. So I
Mm-mm.
think that from that standpoint, you just have to be brave. Of course, a lot of people are not going to be happy because they've already staked their reputation on that and everything. But the thing about science is science is science. You
Mm-mm.
cannot change it to suit your narrative. For instance, ngayon, magandang pinapakita natin and we've already done well in terms of the pandemic overall. You know, there are still some people who say palpak yung response. Na, I don't get that.
Mm-mm.
You know, so
Okay,
what are you
you
gonna do?
mentioned that. So, dyan lumarating ang politika. Because the climate now in our Philippine society, it's the campaign season. So, even if you're not trying to, if you're consciously being apolitical, but public health has been highly politicized and we're still in this crisis right now. So, I think a lot of the things that you say get, whether you like it or not, napopolitika siya. Where do you think this is going to end up and how are we going to resolve, especially kasama pa yung cancel culture? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't think it's everyone. I think most people naman understand that, the government, I make a distinction between the administration and the government.
Right.
Government is something that's continuous, we can't not have government. Otherwise, it's chaos. Versus the administration, which, is also political. Naturally, they have their own narrative. But in order to be able to impact the most number of people, you have to work with government because they have the mandate. Department of Health has all these things in place. You
Mm-hmm.
can't do without them. And so even if you don't like them, and me, I'm not the natural ally of this administration. It's not something that as doctors, we think one way, and it's not necessarily in sync with what the administration wants. But when I was asked to help,
Mm-hmm.
of course I said yes because that is the best way to make an impact. If you are giving sound scientific advice. I mean, I shudder to think now what if we had all said no on the tag, and all these non-doctors and non-scientists would have just gone with whatever ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. And even then, there were attempts to do that and hijack that, and it came at a cost to us to defend that, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure na hindi yun yung maging policy. And ultimately, I'm glad that the government actually did follow what the scientists said.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I have, this is a question that I actually have for you, but somebody also had mentioned it here. So let me read it. This is from Mona Lisa Dizon. Are we seeing the last hurrah of COVID 19? Should we be more concerned because a more dangerous variant is just around the corner? Are we over the storm or is it calm before the real storm? I hope not.
Yeah, well, COVID is continuing to mutate. So, you can't really close the door on it. It could mutate to a point where it can cause another big number of cases. But we are not the way we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, wala talagang population immunity. There were no
Mhm.
vaccines and nobody had been infected yet. But now we already have this level of protection, not necessarily from infection after Omicron came out. From 90%, naging 30 to 40% na lang yung protection against infection. But the protection against severe disease, it remains high, 90%. And so kahit ano pang variant na lumabas yan, we are going to see at least some effectiveness preventing severe disease. So even if
Mhm.
we see, 100, 200,000 cases, most likely we're not going to be in the same boat as we were 2 years ago. Because number one, we have effective treatment. Number two, we already have some immunity such that the number of severe cases is not going to overwhelm our healthcare system. Last week alone, the whole week, even though we had, I think, about almost 3,000 cases over the week, 200 plus per day, there was not a single one that was severe. Not a single one, zero, because of vaccines. And
Mhm.
so even if there is a surge in cases na tumaas dahil may bagong variant with immune escape, I don't think we're going to go back to lockdowns the same way that we had to We had no choice. We had no vaccines. We had no treatment. Very, very different now. And I think very soon, at least siguro the second half of this year, I'm pretty sure WHO will really consider at least declaring the acute phase of the pandemic over. And what that pretty much means is that a lot of these things that we're doing now, yung masks, yung araw-araw na nagte-test ng ibang tao, although even that's trending down already, we can strike a meaningful balance na we can continue to live our lives without having to worry about huge outbreaks or shutting down our society again.
Mm-hmm. And okay, that's very promising and hopeful. I'm glad to hear that. To our audience here, I'm going to be posting some of your comments. At the same time, may I ask all of you to please share naman this live because I was only able to promote it. I'm so bad at promoting these things because I only did it like this morning yata. But my question is, so you mentioned, okay, we have vaccines to be grateful for. What about booster shots? Like what is it's very confusing. Do we, I just got my booster, but what do we need? What's the deadline and what's like, when do we get our boosters?
Right. So boosters, because of if Omicron had not come out, we really wouldn't have needed that many boosters. The thing to understand about the vaccines is first and foremost, they're there to prevent severe infection, severe COVID, and also to prevent death. Yung prevention of symptomatic infection is really more of a bonus kasi hindi naman yun yung primary objective. You wanted to reduce the severity of COVID to the level where we can live with it, the same way we live with the flu. And we've already achieved that for the most part. Kasi yung level of death that we're seeing with COVID now in highly vaccinated places is, approximately that of the flu. And so we don't need all those lockdowns anymore. Hopefully, tuloy-tuloy na yun. But with Omicron, because it's so contagious, and a lot of people do get infected all at the same time, there is a risk to the hospitals. Now, even if it's 0.1%, 0.5%, 0.5% of 600,000 is still a pretty big number. And that can still put strain on the healthcare system. And that's why we recommended that we add the booster because it seems to protect better, not just against infection, but also it tops off the protection from severe. So that's the first booster. So with Omicron circulating right now, the first booster is required. That is
After
essential.
6 months?
At least 3 months. But
3 months.
even if maging 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, it doesn't matter. You don't have to start from scratch. Okay?
Are
Kahit
we the only
madelay,
country doing 3 months?
no, there are several. Germany did it. I think South Korea. We were one of the first countries that decided on 3 months. Actually, the
I
U.S.
was
still does
shocked.
5 months.
I
And I
was
think
shocked. This was in January.
it's part of the reason why our cases are not so bad right now because we
But that's a really
understand
bold decision, isn't it?
it
Like
was.
suddenly say, "Oh, 3 months, get your booster."
Well, we looked at the data. There was data from the
Oh, that's
UK,
science
and
driven.
if there's one thing I can tell you about this government, politics aside, they really do listen to the scientists. The president has always said, "I don't know anything about that. You tell us what to do, and we will follow what the experts advise." I have no complaints about that. The president has been true to his word that he will follow what the scientists say, and he has done so, and that is why we are in good shape right now. Um, we had to be very agile as things started to happen. When we started to see Omicron had finally made it into the country, we understood also that there was data coming out of the UK na the boosters can really help.
Mhm.
And so we implemented that agad. And again, that's expert. There's an all experts group made up of about 52 experts. Pretty much everyone said, yes, we absolutely have to give boosters. And I was surprised na pumayag sila ng 3 months. That was what we were pushing for because the data was there, even more bold than the US. And it turned out to be the right decision.
Wow. Okay. Uh, that is impressive. So we also have this from Lorenzo Reyes. Hello, my two Lodis. My question: so much health and safety disinformation is attributable to the politicization. Is there okay? Very sad, really. We can prevent or at least reduce politics from infecting our nation's health agenda and programs. Is there such a thing that we could do policy wise to protect all of you from being highly politicized? Should there be another health crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a real problem because, yeah, until now, we still have people who refuse to acknowledge that we did well. And for me, that's as bad a fake news as any other fake news that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So we had people attacking us, ridiculing us na we hadn't flattened the curve when we reached what 800 cases no June 2020, whereas the US had what 100,000 a day, 200,000 a day. That's just wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
very early on, I also called. We have to insulate the scientists because the scientists have to go by the science, because the science goes one way or the other. It doesn't follow one political narrative or another. Ang nangyayari dyan is we're following the science. If it's favorable to the admin, then we get attacked by the opposition. If it's favorable to the opposition, we get attacked by the admin. So kawawa talaga yung scientists. We get hit in the middle. So there has to be some understanding that what the scientists are saying is based on the science, and we have to follow what it says. And if you
Mm-hmm.
attack us, it's kawawa eh. And
Mm-hmm.
but we have to stick with that kasi hindi ko naman pwedeng baguhin yung findings na yun eh. The only way that you're going to get better to change what we're saying is to get better evidence. And that's always there. It's always a possibility. That's why we changed our what we were saying about face shields and about face masks as well. Yung face shields, for instance, there is actually very good data that it decreases transmission and protects your eyes. Pero pag mababa ang number of cases, it's not as necessary kasi meron din namang issues with visibility and those kinds of things. So we change these things based on the science. And if you're gonna try to politicize it to fit someone's narrative, whether it's admin or opposition, that's anti-science. That's fake news. That's disinformation. So, I think that in terms of educating people is very, very important to understand that scientists hindi po kami kumakampi sa isang faction or another. Kampi po kami sa science.
Wow. Um, what about your career personally? Like you, let's say in a perfect world, this pandemic is over tomorrow, and there's no more IATF. How public will you remain? I mean, you have grown your social media following. You are now you're making infectious disease very understandable to many of us. How will you remain? Will you still remain quite public about your work?
If you look at my Facebook page, it's not a public
I
person
know
thing.
it's a
My
personal
personal
page.
exactly. So, I'm kind of an outspoken guy. If I see things that are not right, I will say it. I do have my column with Manila Bulletin. Originally, it was established for COVID, but obviously, as we get less and less COVID, maybe I'll write about some other infectious disease. I think it's very important that we maintain these kinds of platforms. I still have my HIV advocacy, and we this is not, even if WHO says this pandemic is over, the next pandemic could just be around the corner.
Mhm.
So it's very important that we have reliable sources of information, that we know who to talk to, and also that the public understands, at the very least, what the objectives are from a public health standpoint. Ngayon nga, natutuwa na kami, at least alam ng tao kung anong RT-PCR, alam nila
Mm.
sensitivity, specificity. All these things enter our vocabulary. And in a way, it's always good that people are trying to understand these things. But then again, it's also very easy to misinterpret it. Yung issue of mass testing, which really should not have been a big issue. Kasi
Yeah.
we know that the tests are not perfect, and so we have to treat them properly.
Right.
And then one of my co-TED fellows, si Adam Kucharski, who actually wrote books on pandemics even before the pandemic hit, was saying that there are a lot of nuances to these things. And if you're going to start using scientific terms as slogans, then magkakaroon talaga ng politicization, and people will understand what they need to understand. No, it's very, very important that we defer to the science, we defer to the experts, because it's very easy to be misled by a lot of this
Mhm.
information.
Okay, some very nice comments here from Cheng Vizcara. Dr. Salvana, you all did well fighting COVID alongside the government. Wow, thank you, Cheng. Joy
Yeah, I think
Magbanwa.
maybe I'll just make a comment about that. It wasn't just with the government; it was with the Filipino people. Po. There are a lot of people who are not noisy lang, especially private sector. We were trying to survive, and we all did our part. I think that's important. It wasn't a government response, it was
Mhm.
a Filipino response. And so, barring some politics who refused to understand what we were doing or that what we did actually did work given the resources we had, which WHO has repeatedly said the Philippines did well
Yes.
considering the resources, considering that we continued to accept Filipinos coming home. Australia barred their people from coming home for 2 years. That's inhumane. Not just Australia, a lot of other countries. But we continue to take that. And that's the other thing I do admire about the president. Because when we were telling him, sir, papasok ang variants kung tanggapin natin yung mga Filipinos na bumalik. And he said, I cannot say no to them.
Hmm.
He himself said he will let them come, just make the precautions. And yet, even then, of course, it's not perfect. Nagkaroon pa rin tayo ng B1, ng Delta, ng ano. Those were calculated risks. And despite that, we still did well. So I think overall, I am proud of the Filipino response.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I agree. Joy Magbanwa, thank you so much, Doc Edsel Salvana. The information you shared is something that keep a lot of people from panicking. That was me. You calmed me. I don't never read scientific documents before, but for some reason, your posts during those dark days around like April, May, June, July 2020, you really you were a voice that provided calm and hope. I mean, you explained science and you said that this will end. There is an end to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the other important thing to understand is as a doctor, I see things on the ground. As a molecular biologist, I understand what the lab is doing. And then as an advisor and an administrator, I see where the policy is going. So I think yung value added namin, kaming tatlo sa tag, Dr. Alejandria, Dr. Ana Onglim, and myself, as clinicians, we knew what was going on the ground. And we could always tell DOH na, okay, yung mga estimates nyo ng capacity, I don't believe that because there's 100 people lined up in the ER. So,
Oh my.
we were very vocal about those things. Of course, you don't attack people online or anything like that. But I will tell you that there were a lot of things that we told the government to help them fine tune their response because they're not there. Eh. And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, we get attacked. Bakit wala kayong sinasabing na ayusin ng government? No, all the time. Every single day, we had something to say. All the experts were not shy about telling the government we have to fix this, we have to do this better. We just don't say it out loud because
Right.
kung mangyari yon, politics na yon, di ba?
Yeah.
Your goal in pointing things out is for somebody to improve their response. If you're going to shame them publicly, magiging defensive yan. And mas
Mhm.
mahihirapan tayong mag-move forward together. I was
Mhm.
telling people na, and I got flack for this, early on na they were going after Secretary Duque, who was really trying to do his best. Think of us as we're in a bus and we're driving through a minefield, yung COVID. Sinisigawan mo yung driver, nakasakay ka rin naman dun sa bus. Siguro gawin natin, let's help the driver, we get out, and then pag nabuhay tayo, tsaka natin sabihin na, okay, you could have done this better and done that. Hindi eh. While everyone
Mhm.
was shooting at us, while the pandemic was in full force, sunod-sunod yung batikos. And it's very,
Mhm.
very, very difficult to work under those circumstances. I mean, it's hard to think already when your colleagues are dropping dead and people are
Mhm.
yelling at you. Tama
Mhm.
na, di ba? Let us
Mhm.
think, let us see if the overall response is bad, then hold us accountable at the end of it when people are no longer dying. But
Mhm.
when we're trying to do what we think is best and we have the experts with us, siguro naman let's try to help each other out para at least mas maganda yung outcome.
Mhm. Doc, with your experience in and expertise in the lab, with clinical exposure, policy recommendations. I mean, is that a stepping stone towards possibly being the next DOH secretary? Is that something that you think about?
I've worked with a lot of administrators in my life, and executive people, um, uh, and I've seen a lot of leadership people. My father-in-law is Dr. Ernesto Domingo, who's a Ramon Magsaysay awardee, and he's a national scientist. And as I was going on in my career, I could see people, doing, getting attacked, getting all these things that are happening to them. And I always told myself, why would I ever want to do that to myself? Alam mo yun? It's parang I see Sec Duque and he gets attacked on a daily basis, and I feel bad for the guy because he's really
Mhm.
trying his best. And so sa akin, these executive positions are probably something that I don't really have all that appetite for. I just got promoted to full professor. I
Oh,
have a lot of
congratulations.
that I need to. Thank you. And I have a full lab. We have grants. I have my TED fellowship. My plate is full. I have a lot of things that I want to do. If there are those kinds of opportunities, I will think about them. But right now, I'm in a good place to pardon the.
A good place. Okay.
Uh,
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. This is from Jerry Well. Thank you for this informative and refreshing discussion. I'm learning a lot. Wow. Well, thank you for being here. Don Santiago, thank you, Doc Salvana and Doc Solante. You guys saved my life. Is this a patient, perhaps? Anyway.
yes. Well, Dr. Solante is a good colleague of mine at the Medical Center Manila, and he's also very vocal, and he's part of the experts group. He's on the vaccine experts panel.
Wow.
There were a lot of scientists, epidemiologists in the government response. We're just not very loud,
Mhm.
except for me. But the thing is, and that it makes me mad when people say that the government does not have experts. Some of the best experts are there. Yung nagmo-model sa amin yung faster, these are professors in Ateneo and AIM, and it's just not fair because a lot of my colleagues are working 24/7 on these projections and everything, and then some other non-expert naman starts talking about stuff that's not correct.
Right.
Anyway, there's also misinformation in that sense. And of course, kami,
Well, some of it came
because
from the medical community too.
yes, I mean the medical community is not immune to disinformation as well. And in fact, in a way it's more dangerous because
Mhm.
syempre dala nila yung MD na yan eh. And of course, very important to think about the subspecialties. For instance, infectious diseases, we're the ones who really deal with a lot of these vaccines about pandemics. It's probably better to listen to people with that kind of background when it
Yeah.
comes to pandemics.
Okay, so more appreciation. I just want you to get all of this love from our viewers because you guys really deserve it. I mean, we're very very grateful to all the things that you've done. This is from Alvin Joseph Romero. Thank you, Doc, for your effort in helping our country. It's very nice. This is from Phoebe Valle. So this is so good. Prof. Clarita Carlos, Abel Bacudo, and now Edsel Salvana. Congratulations. More of this, please. And yes, Dengvaxia is a very good vaccine. Meron bang nagdamihan ng kaso ng dengue for the last 2 years ng pandemic? Meron ba? But I know dengue is still around. My friend just got it.
It is, but the cases went down because people weren't out and about. But dengue
Yeah.
is something that's going to keep coming back, and so we do need the vaccines. There's a new vaccine aside from Dengvaxia. Another company has actually proven that another vaccine works. I think it's a Takeda vaccine. And the other thing is, kasi yung concern lang naman talaga is if you give the dengue vaccine to people who have not had dengue, the risk of yung more severe dengue might go up to the level na parang you've had dengue before. The bottom line there is there are also tests that are now point of care na you can test someone before you give them the vaccine. So I think that once we get over the stigma and all that nonsense that happened to Dengvaxia, we really should come back to the idea of making dengue vaccines available for our children with the proper precautions and with all this additional data na, because it is a good vaccine.
Okay, good. This is from Luella. Yes, it is the faith and obedience of the Filipino people. From Ching de Los Reyes. Love
You know,
your.
I would like to say something about that because I think that you saw naman, um, people were always asking me and Ted, how did the Philippines just get 60,000 deaths, whereas in the US there's more than a
Mm,
million deaths? You know,
mm,
there's two things there. You know, first of all, pinakinggan ng gobyerno yung scientists.
mhm.
Sa kanila, they have the best scientists. My God, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Peter Hotez, all these people, you know, even the people who taught me infectious diseases in Cleveland, they're super smart and they have all the pandemic response resources and everything. Unfortunately, President Trump and the others did not listen to them. So, number one yun, palpak. Number two, hindi rin sumusunod yung people nila. 'Di ba? Hindi ang daming anti-vaxxers, ang
Culturally.
daming
Oo.
anti-maskers. But here in the Philippines, aside from the fact that the government did listen to the scientists, the people kept their masks on, they got their vaccines when they needed to keep the face shields on, they did. So it's like
Masunurin.
I said, it's a Filipino response. Um, if one of those did not work, where we wouldn't have done well.
Well, that's amazing. Your foreign colleagues must be, amazed and a little envious of your situation then, because they didn't have the
Yeah,
same support.
yeah, I think 2 months ago, I gave a talk to my alma mater where I did infectious disease, Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and I showed them the data, and they're going, how did you guys do that? You know first of all, it was the early lockdown. Early lockdown saved at least 200,000 lives. The
Yeah.
fact that it was decisive and it was a hard lockdown, unfortunately, I know a lot of people
Yeah.
suffered. I know a lot of people lost their jobs, but we would have ended up with those anyway, plus 200,000 deaths if we didn't lock down when we did. So that's one. Number two is the fact nga na sinunod ng mga tao yung instructions, and there was a lot of trust, at least in terms of keeping your face masks on. We did have some challenges with vaccine confidence early on, but ngayon sinasite nga tayo ng G20 na we were able to get over the hump na in terms of we're getting up to 85% vaccine acceptance. And I think this is really a testament to how we had, people constantly, not just me, but actually DOH, private sector, really pushing that vaccines are the way out of this pandemic. And people took that to heart and did what they had to do. So again, I am proud of the Filipino response, and I think that everyone contributed to it, and I think that we should not downplay it at all because of politics. We did a good job. I don't think that takes away from anybody in terms of their political beliefs. If you keep denying it, it just makes you a spreader of fake news.
Right. I'm just posting here and people just can read. There's so many comments. Maraming salamat sa mga viewers. We only have a few minutes left dahil ang time talaga ni Doc ay very precious at binigyan niya lang ako ng 1 hour. But to wrap this up, Doc, we're not yet over the pandemic, but things are looking up and I am getting a sense a little bit of normalcy returning, at least in my family's life. But I carry with me the lessons of this collective experience that we had. And the lesson that I have is humility talaga. What is the lesson that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's one of them. I learned so much more than that. I mean, first of all, I think that politics and science really shouldn't mix. The bad kind of politics. There is a good kind of politics, obviously, where you can get people to do what needs to be done. For instance, the president did show that na he could get people from all walks of life to follow what he wanted to do. Of course, he has a lot of his critics. He's not a saint, obviously, but in the sense that he was able to lead and get people to follow what were science based things. I think it's very very important. I think that scientists like me dapat required yung TED training because siguro I'll make this very quick kwento. Yung when we were trying to get the Philippines to shut down, Sec Duque asked me to make a very short presentation to the
I saw
IATF,
that.
which at that
Yeah,
point had pretty much, obviously we had 52 cases and we were going to lock down Metro Manila. Are you crazy? That was pretty much, and even I thought about it. This is crazy. But, so think TED Talk, how do you get a message across to people? And so I used the movie line. I said, uh, uh, every disaster movie starts with everyone ignoring the scientist. And I'm a scientist.
I
Let's
remember that.
change the ending. So, and
Oh
at
my,
that point, the whole IATF decided to trust us. And we changed the ending.
look at that. That is a gift, Doc. Like you have the gift of communicating, not just to the public, but to your peers and to the authorities that matter. And, because of that, Doc, you have saved lives. So we are so grateful to you. And, I will defend you all throughout, really. And I really hope that we won't need your services anymore in terms of
I hope
this
so too.
crisis, so that you could just go and do your TED Talks and do your your further studies and live in peace, But thank you so much, Dr. Salvania. And to close this, any final words, any other things you want to announce? Where can we follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I am on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not so active on Twitter nowadays because it's hard to do science in what 280 characters, and I do get into
Baka
fights.
your friend Elon Musk will change things.
Well, we'll see what happens, right? But I think it's important nga that I think the most important thing is that we learn to trust the science. Ang science po may methodology po talaga yan. And it does change as we get better data. And it is really not something that you can follow that you can make it follow your narrative. That's something I learned very early on as a scientist. Now, I have this hypothesis, I'm so happy about it, I'm writing about it. And then I do the experiment and it completely contradicts it. I don't change the experiment. I change what I wrote. I say this is what the data showed. So I was wrong, and this is how we're going to proceed. That's how science works. And I think that we have to be much more aware that there is good data out there and there is fake news out there, and we need to know the difference because, as what happened in this case, it can be a matter of life and death. And the scientists really have to speak up. We have to be able to talk to our policymakers. We have to make ourselves heard. But that's not the end of it. We also have to advocate for the science to the people who are always looking for answers. It's very difficult. There's a lot of uncertainty. People have lost jobs, people have lost loved ones. But it's very, very important to understand that the approach during times of crisis it's really important that we have a science-based policy, and we have to explain to the people why we are doing this, because ultimately if they don't comply, wala rin mangyayari. And I think we were able to do that. Obviously there was not a perfect response, but it was a good response. And WHO agrees, pretty much everyone agrees. Everyone's having rallies now because we did good. And I think we should acknowledge that. We should celebrate it. And we should prevent more spikes by continuing to wear our mask, getting your booster, and just really thinking about it as Filipinos, not as one party, as opposition, as admin or anything. Because the virus knows no politics. It's the same for my patients. I have never asked a patient, who are you voting for in the elections?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. You're sick, you're a patient in front of me, I will help you. Same with the doctors that I work with. I never ask if I refer to a cardiologist, who are you voting for? No, because I know that that colleague of mine is an expert. Please help me save this patient. And that's really how it should be. Um, you know, Work together so that we can be a better nation.
I think all of these lessons that you shared is applicable not just in public health, but in our daily lives. Thank you so much, Dr. Edsel Salvana, thank you so much. And I hope this is not the last time we'll talk to you because ang dami talagang comments and very nice, encouraging words here, and I will be sharing them. And folks, I'll be posting this complete interview in the website and keep sharing it kasi ang daming nuggets of wisdom ni Doc Salvana. So, salamat again, Doc, and mabuhay kayo.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Daphne. Thanks, everyone.
Ayan. Teka lang. Sorry, Doc, I have to kick you from studio. Or you can exit. I don't want to. Okay. Okay, that was weird. I said kick, but anyway. Wow. Whew. That was fantastic. Dr. Salvana is one of my heroes. I have never met him personally, just online, and I am very grateful for his presence. And apparently, all of you also found his service very, very helpful. As I mentioned, he was one of them who calmed me during the darkest times of the pandemic. So, thank you all of you for being here. Let me just spend a few more minutes here to post some of your comments. Ang dami. Now I don't know if I. Sorry, just a minute. I think my husband is. I'm online. I'm live. Okay, hope you don't hear him. I think he's in a meeting. Okay, so from Rowan Castillo, Leadership and Trust Matters. From Gary Sumalde, thank you, Dr. Salvana, and your team for everything that you did and will continue to do for the Filipino people. Been reading and sharing your posts a lot since the pandemic began. Thank you for your expertise in social media. This is really nice. This is a good one talaga. Pwede itong ilagay sa quote, no? Yung sinabi niyang Filipino obedience and the Filipino approach. Ganda. Partly because majority Filipino, trust the president, siguro. And when he said, get the vaccine, wear your mask, we followed. Maraming factors also, cultural and religious and family. Terry Olan Reyes, thank you, Dr. Salvana and Daphne, for the most informative and very relevant updates where we are in the pandemic. Thank you for everything you've done for our country and through the oh yes, okay. So maraming salamat, Terry. Dami. Anthony Villar, bravo din to you for bringing out what's good from the nightmare we all went through. Oh, thank you. Bravo, Dr. Edsel. Parang therapy ko na rin yun to share, good information. Okay. I like this. Jerry, well, you still look the same 25 years ago during F Days with Angel and Cher. Ay, salamat. And Bert, ganda ni ma'am. Nako, ikaw naman, salamat. Lou, Ella, thank you. I appreciate this very much. Joy, Galamaso, Bacon. Very interesting talk. Thanks so much. Ang daming thank you, guys. I really appreciate you being here and for being interested in our talk and for having an open mind and keeping this environment open and friendly and kind. Maraming salamat talaga. I ask all of you, if you found this talk interesting, please press the share button para mas maraming makanood nito. Ito, DOH, who UNICEF, Dr. Salvana, all I listen to for COVID news. Thanks for this, Miss Daphne. From Mildred Fermian. And Joey, thanks for featuring Dr. Salvana in your program. And I like what you said, sharing good information with all of this information. At saka, I don't know if you noticed, medyo na emotional ako doon when I said the greatest lesson I learned from the pandemic is the humility. Kasi parang ang bilis nag-turn around na may pandemic pa nga, pero parang ngayon, ang dami ng, parang we just went back to the way it was, or even worse. So sana we cling on to the lessons that we learned throughout this, this struggle that we went through together as a nation and as a world. Let's lessen the judgment on each other and let's be kind. We all want the same things: good health, prosperity, beauty, all of those things. So let's tone down the hate and the judgment that's going around. So, it has been a while now. We've been live for an hour and 10 minutes. Maraming salamat. And if you would like to see other people in this nice fake talk show that I have, ginagawa ko lang to dahil may time ako ng konti. Please let me know kung sino ang gusto ninyong mapanood dito sa Daphne Live. And I will see what we can do. Maraming salamat ulit, and please share this broadcast if you found it interesting. So thank you again sa mga bago kong followers. Nga pala, hindi ko pa na-check, but as of kanina, medyo mga 50,000 na bago ang nandito sa Facebook ko. Maraming salamat talaga. I really appreciate your comments and your nice messages. Let us all be, sabi nga ni Avel sa video na na-post ko kanina, dapat yung change ay nag-uumpisa sa atin. So, wag tayong, let's not propagate hate and anger. Kalma lang tayo. Sabi nga ni, ano ba yun? Burger. Anyways, maraming salamat ulit, and thank you very much. Kita-kita ulit tayo next time. This has been Daphne Osenya, Paez. Bye!